Greetings again, everybody. This is part three of the botany lecture, and this lecture will focus on fruit and flower anatomy and morphology. Again, we're emphasizing the reproductive structures of a subset of plants called the angiosperms for the flowering plants. A reminder, though, that plants can undergo both asexual and sexual reproduction. Asexual vegetative reproduction is the production of new physiological individuals, in theory. So they're all genetically identical and clones of themselves. For example, if a plant that has rhizomes or below ground horizontal stems uh, grows the rhizomes out and new vertical shoots or stems grow from that rhizome, and then if at some point that rhizome becomes separated, suddenly you have two physiologically distinct individuals, but genetically they are identical. Asexual reproduction has some advantages in that you can spread your population quickly, but the disadvantage is there's no variation in the offspring. So sex has evolved, or sex-like reproduction has evolved in most organisms in some form or another as a method to generate new genetic diversity in offspring, with the idea being with a population of offspring, one or more of them might be more or less favored by natural selection under different conditions. And with plants, many of them, as I said, can do both. But a lot of what we'll talk about today is how they reproduce sexually. And again, a reminder on to compare this reproductive mode to some of the other groups of plants. So with flowering plants, they have complex reproductive organs called flowers that take different forms depending on how they're pollinated. Many of them have correlations or pollination syndromes that attract certain animal pollinators, while others have flowers that are evolved for dispersing and capturing pollen in the wind. Likewise, flowers, unlike some of the lower plants, have structured flowers that develop into fruits that also aid in dispersal. So different types of fruits are evolved to be dispersed in different ways, including by animals or by wind or by floating on water or self-dispersal, etc. That contrasts to the simpler forms of dispersal of gametes and dispersal of propagules, like in ferns and mosses we mentioned, they have swimming sperm that require a film of water rather than pollen, which both gymnosperms and angiosperms have. Sperm cells are single-celled, whereas pollen is a small multi-celled male plant that contains sperm cells. And the ferns and mosses also disperse by spores and not seeds or fruits that you would see in gymnosperms and angiosperms, respectively. Angiosperms, as I mentioned before, evolved in the early Cretaceous, but really radiated in the Cenozoic era after, so really the late Cretaceous, and then after the little incident with the meteor about 65 million years ago, uh, really radiated rapidly, and there was a lot of coevolution between insects or between animals and plants that led to the elaboration and diversification of flower and fruit forms. So that now 90% of plant life in terms of as measured by species diversity consists of angiosperms. So to emphasize again, different flowers attract different pollinators or no pollinators at all, and different fruits are dispersed in different ways with or without different kinds of animals. In general, just some examples of pollination syndromes. Butterfly pollinated plants tend to provide lots of nectar. Moth pollinated plants tend to be heavily scented and white, so they can be more easily seen at night when most moths are more active. Bee pollinated plants often have lots of instructions and directions and landing zones and pointers, and often require the bee to enter the flower to access nectar, collect pollen, and get pollen all over their body. Um, Hummingbird pollinated plants tend to be red. They tend to have tubular flowers that preferentially select for better access via the hummingbird's long beak. Bat pollinated or mammal pollinated flowers tend to be also rather large and provide a lot of nectar because the animals themselves are relatively large compared to insects. And with bat pollinated flowers, they're obviously more active at night typically. So they also tend to be white and strongly scented. Fly pollinated flowers, if depending on the group of flies, but in many classic fly pollinated flowers, they tend to be smell not so nice. They tend to smell like things flies like. Tend to be kind of fleshy colored sometimes. And again, a good local example is pawpaw, which has kind of reddish flowers. This is not pawpaw, but um, that don't smell great, and they're often fly pollinated. When pollinated flowers do not need to attract any animals, so they do not divert energy and matter into producing elaborate structures to attract pollinators. So instead, they have usually a higher concentration of smaller flowers, and those flowers have structures that encourage dispersal of pollen in the wind and capture of pollen in the wind. So on this example here, we have the catkins or the male inflorescences, groups of flowers of maybe a birch or something. And when they're dangling like this, they're called catkins, and they're typically on the tips of branches, so that allows them to disperse the pollen more easily. And here are uh, is a close-up of some bisexual flowers of a grass. And you can see on the stigmas here, they have a lot of this fringy hairs that enable better capturing of pollen grains in air currents. And here are the stamens that release pollen. All right, on to the structure of a flower. This is a generalized flower, a perfect and complete flower. We'll learn about what that is in a minute, but they have all of their parts. There's a lot of variation in flower structure, a lot of variation in the number of these parts, how they're fused together or not, their relative prominence, etc. So learning how much flowers can vary is a really keystone of uh, distinguishing among plants and identifying plants. So the parts of a flower are grouped in concentric uh, in concentric units going from the outside to the inside of the flower structure. So in this diagram, you'll see the name of and then sorry, and those concentric units are called whorls, WHORLS. And the name of the whorl is in brackets here, and the name of the units of that whorl are above the name of the whorl itself. So going from outside to inside, the whorls are called the calyx, the corolla, the androecium, and the gynoecium, composed of sepals, petals, stamens, and pistils, respectively. The calyx and the sepals that make up the calyx form the outermost whorl. When the flower is closed, it forms usually the green kind of outer bud part of the flower that protects the other parts of the flower. When the flower opens up, the calyx and the sepals form usually the small leafy-like components at the base of the flower. So the primary function of the calyx is to protect the developing flower. But in other cases, it's also used for attraction. In other cases, it might be reduced. There are other variations there, but in a Platonic sense, they are you know, usually about protecting the developing flower. The next whorl in is called the corolla. And the corolla is comprised of individual petals, and most often the function of the corolla is to be colorful, to be attractive, to have markings to attract pollinators. So usually it is the petals that are most prominent for attracting pollinators. But again, all parts of the flower can be modified to aid in that process. So you might see some flowers that have very colorful and prominent stamens or pistils or sepals, etc. Combined, the corolla and the calyx comprise the perianth, which literally means outer flower. So these are the parts of the flower that are not directly involved in sexual reproduction. The next whorl in is collectively called the andrecium. And this, you probably won't ever encounter the word andrecium very commonly, but just to show there is an um, equivalent name for this whorl. And the andro means man. Ecium comes from the Greek word oikos, or house, so it literally means house of man. Likewise, the gynecium, the next whorl in, the female reproductive parts, it literally means house of woman or house of female. Sidebar, don't you think andrecium or gynecium would be great names, maybe for a gay bar? But the andrecium is composed of individual stamens. The stamens themselves consist of two parts, the anther and the filament. The anther is the structure that produces and releases pollen, and the filament attaches the anther to the rest of the flower. The gynecium, again, is the female reproductive structure composed of individual pistils. And sidebar, now we won't get into too much detail. I can talk about this more in person if you are curious. But in theory, the real fundamental unit of the gynecium is the carpel, and many pistils are comprised of multiple fused carpels. So a pistil might, depending on how it's structured, might indicate that evolutionarily speaking, it was once several separate pistils that fused together developmentally. But for all intents and purposes, you can think of the pistil as the fundamental unit, equivalent unit. The pistil consists of three parts that can be viewed externally: the stigma, the style, and the ovary. The stigma is the tip of the pistil. Often it's a little bit swollen, and that is the part of the stigma that receives pollen. So that's where pollen grains are moved to through a pollinator or some pollination process. Then I'll show you in the next slide, but the pollen grain basically will germinate and grow through the stigma, sorry, go through the style and enter the swollen base of the pistil called the ovary. Inside the ovary are ovules, and inside the ovules, each ovule is an egg cell, along with some other cells and cell nuclei. Long story short, more to come in a second, but what happens is the pollen grain germinates, grows a pollen tube down the style, enters the ovary, finds an ovule, and deposits sperm cells contained inside the pollen grain to fertilize the egg nucleus and then two polar nuclei. At the base of the flowers, there can be, or in different parts of the flowers, or sometimes outside of the flowers, there can be nectaries. These are glands, specialized glands that produce nectar or sugar water, essentially, to attract pollinators as a reward. All of the flower parts fuse together in an area called the receptacle. Sometimes the receptacle can vary in its prominence, and sometimes it's the receptacle that develops into the fruit. But generally speaking, after pollination and then fertilization take place, it's the ovary that grows and develops and swells to become the fruit. The ovules become the seeds, and the seeds contain what now is a zygote, a diploid zygote, that develops into the plant embryo, and then another part becomes the nutritive tissue called the endosperm. The flower is attached to the stem through a structure, a little stem-like structure called a pedicel that's somewhat equivalent to the petiole on a leaf. And sometimes at the base of flowers, you'll see a little leaf, an extra leaf. Sometimes it can be many, sometimes just a few, but they're individually called a bract or bracts. And for identification, sometimes the presence or absence of the bract or the appearance of the bract can be helpful. But as we'll see with some photos later, the number of floral parts, their shape, their form, their position, how they are fused to one another or to each other are all potential variations in flower form and morphology. So here is what a pollen grain looks like when it germinates. It produces a pollen tube and distributes two sperm cells down the pollen tube. Here's a pollen grain landing on the stigma, germinating on the stigma, producing a pollen tube that grows down the style into the ovary, finding an ovule. Inside the ovule, there are several nuclei and cells that have divided, or a cell that's divided into several nuclei, including an egg nucleus and two polar nuclei. One sperm cell fuses with the egg nucleus, so returning the haploid sperm and the haploid egg nucleus into a diploid state, meaning going from one copy of the chromosomes or a half the ultimate copy number. Many plants uh, are polyploid. And then the other sperm cell actually fuses with two other polynuclei to create triploid or some multiple of triploid endosperm nucleus. The result is the fused zygote grows into the plant embryo, and the endosperm nucleus then divides and grows into the endosperm. Don't get endosperm confused with real sperm. Uh, Sperm is just the Latin word, maybe Greek word, for seed. So endosperm means internal seed. And essentially, the endosperm functions as nutritive tissue for the developing embryo and or for the emerging seedling. Because when the seed germinates, it is not yet fully photosynthetic. So it's relying on stored energy to germinate and produce its first set of true leaves that are fully photosynthetic. The embryo does contain seedling leaves, the cotyledons, remember from dicot versus monocot, but those are not always fully photosynthetic. And then in some plants, the developing embryo consumes the endosperm before it germinates, and so the seedling may emerge with well-developed uh, cotyledons and true leaves potentially, but so there's a lot of variation there. But this is kind of the most basic process. Then again, what I'll show you this again more later, but after fertilization takes place, the other parts of the flowers are not of the flower is not needed. So the sepals will often dehisce or fall off, the petals will dehisce, the stamens will dehisce, the stigma and style will often shrivel, and the ovary swells to grow into the fruit. And so the ovary becomes the fruit, the ovule becomes the seed, and the fertilized zygote develops into the embryo. One of the types of variations you can see in flower structure is whether or not the flower is actually bisexual. I would say the default is having a bisexual flower. So they have both pistils and stamens. And maybe a better word for this that would be hermaphroditic, but we tend to say bisexual in this case because there are two sexes, not necessarily being attracted to two sexes, but having two sexes. And uh, 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 for those, and we tend to call bisexual flowers perfect, which is fun, but um, they're having bisexual flowers, in theory, presents some risk of self-pollination. Many flowers, even if they are bisexual, however, have some mechanisms to reduce the chances of self-pollination. Those can be different heights of the pistils and stamens so that they don't accidentally touch each other during development. It can be differential timing of maturity of stamens and pistils. And then many plants have self-recognition mechanisms where if their own pollen lands on them, their genetic markers that will signal them to abort and kill their own pollen. So they don't want their own stuff on them. However, another way to decrease the risk of self-pollination and defeating the purpose of sex is to have unisexual flowers or even unisexual plants. So a unisexual flower will have only stamens or only pistils, described as staminate flowers and pistillate flowers, or male flowers and female flowers, respectively. So looking at these images here, this is a common woodland plant whose common name I've suddenly forgotten. Um, Bloodroot or something. Sanguinaria has the root. The root word is blood there. I forgot what the common name is, but it's in the it's in the APAC perhaps. But anyway, you can see there are petals and petal-like sepals, and here are the stamens, multiple stamens and multiple pistils at the center. Here is the greatest of hibiscus after cacao, of course, but or the hibiscus family. But this is a scarlet mallow or rose mallow. Here are the sepals behind. Here are the large petals. And in the case of everything in the hibiscus family, the stamens are actually wrapped around the style, which is kind of cool. And you can see that's these little structures here. And here are the five stigmas on a fused um, uh, in a fused pistil. But they have both pistils and stamens. They have both pistils and stamens. Contrast that to this cucurbit squash or cucumber flowers. These are the male flowers. They just have stamens. And here are the the female flowers that just have pistils. More examples. Here is a perfect flower of a grass that I showed you before. Grasses also have lots of extra structures that you have to learn if you want to identify them, but they've got pairs of ovaries, or sorry, pairs of pistils called loticules, and each pistil has this bifurcated stigma. That's why they're hairy, and each flower has three different stamens. Here's a closer up image of that hibiscus, sepals, petals. Here is the stigma, style, and ovary at the base, but wrapped around the style are many stamens. Then plants with unisexual flowers can be monoecious or dioecious, meaning that they can be a single individual that has separate male and female flowers on the same plant, monoecious, meaning one house, or they can have entire individuals that only have male flowers or only have female flowers. Those are called dioecious plants, meaning two houses. So many, say, oaks and hickories. This is a type of hickory called the pecan. And here are the male inflorescences at the tip, and a little bit below them are the separate female flowers. And hollies and wax myrtles are good examples of dioecious plants. Here are the male flowers or the staminate flowers on a male holly. You can see the petals and the stamens are with the anthers bright yellow presenting pollen. Here are, but they lack any sort of pistils. Here are the flowers of the female plant. They have petals. They've got little sepals behind there. They have non-functional stamens. You see how the anthers are clear, and then the swollen form of the pistil in the center. And then there are certainly every variation in between. Sometimes you can have plants that are mostly monoecious, unisexual, maybe sometimes have uh, or let me take that back. There you can have plants that are mostly dioecious, but occasionally have monoecious, so they might have both flowers on them. There's this incredible sexual diversity in plants. So if you can imagine a combination, it might exist in the plant kingdom. Flowers can also vary in their symmetry. They can either be radially symmetrical or bilaterally symmetrical as a general trend, but not a rule. A more primitive or more distantly diverging lineages of plants tend to have radially symmetrical flowers where there are multiple planes of symmetry, whereas more recently derived plant groups tend to have, as a trend, bilaterally symmetrical flowers. So there's only one plane about which the flower is symmetrical. In the same way, we are only symmetrical over one plane. This is from Evening Primrose, but a great example. You got four petals, um, I think 4 to 8 stamens, and this four-lobed stigma with a single pistil. Here is the the flower of lobelia. This is great blue lobelia. And you can see they have a fused flower that's in a tube that's bilaterally symmetrical. And Antirrhinum is a species of snapdragon, also showing clear bilateral symmetry. Uh, different parts of plants can be, different parts of flowers can be fused together in different ways that have some descriptions. So, for example, petals are often, if they are not fused together, are said to be free petals or apopetalous. But if flowers are fused together in a tube, like you see on these penstamen, they are said to be fused or sympetalous. But similar terms can apply to the sepals too, and different flowers can have different combinations of these fusions. They might have free sepals but fused petals, or uh, free petals and fused sepals, or fused sepals and petals, or free sepals and petals, etc. And in general, anytime any part of a flower is fused together into one unit, it's said to be connate with itself. So in this case, this infundibular corolla, this kind of trumpet-shaped, funnel-shaped corolla, is comprised of multiple petals fused together or connate into a tube at the base, and then it flares out at the top. If, like in this uh, astragalus here, the stamens are mostly fused together into nine or so eight stamens here, then one extra one over, sorry, 10 fused here, nine fused here, and one extra over here. That's called diadelphous stamen structure. Um, and then in the case of hibiscus, as I mentioned, the stamens are connate at the filament. So they're fused together and wrapped around, but not necessarily quite fused with, I don't think, to the style itself. If if flower parts are fused to different flower parts, they're said to be adnate to each other. So, like in the case of this trumpet creeper flower, which we'll see all over here, the stamens are actually fused at the filaments to the corolla tube. So we say the stamens are adnate to the petals. You can have, you might have stamens fused to the pistils. You can have, um, uh, what is another combination? Um, in the case of Hypanthea, which we'll see in a minute, all the parts are kind of fused into one cup at the base, for example. But the most common derivation of this is having stamens adnate to petals. And then we also have terms to describe different general flower shapes. And often these are derived from different types of fusions to varying degrees. So a bilabiate flower, like you often see in the mint family, bilabiate means two-lipped. So what would have been perhaps five separate petals are fused into a tube at the top. The two lobes are fused together as one, and then there are three separate lobes at the base. I mentioned infundibular flowers or funnel form shaped flowers. This is of a species of morning glory. So you see there are more or less free sepals at the base, but fused petals that flare out in a opening funnel at the tip. Campanulate flowers mean kind of bell-shaped. Um, so they kind of flare out they're fused, but then flare, short and squat, but kind of fused out at the base and flare at the tip. Urceolate flowers means urn-shaped, and these are characteristic of many species in the blueberry family, the Ericaceae. So you can see they flare out and then narrow back at the tip, kind of like an urn does. Cruciate flowers mean cross-shaped flowers, like many species of, of in the mustard family, Brassicaceae. So there's a pair of petals that are 90 degrees from another pair of petals. Salviform means that they are fused at the base, flare out at the tip, but the petals are kind of the petal lobes are 90 degrees from the tube, as in this phlox. It's characteristic of most phloxes. A palpinaceous flower is a description of a flower form in a subfamily of the legumes, where you have a pair of banner petals at the top, two wing petals, and keel petals in the center. And this is really optimized for bee pollination. This is a baptisia. Another character that can vary within flower morphology is the relative position of the ovary compared to the rest of the parts of the flower. So the default, perhaps the more common position is a superior ovary. So superior meaning above. So the ovary is clearly above the other parts of the flower. So you see that the stamens and petals and sepals all attached below the ovary. But in plants with inferior ovaries, the ovaries are beneath the sepals, the petals, and the stamens. This is characteristic of some families, like the Cucurbitaceae, all have, meaning the cucurbit, cucumber, melon, squash family, all have inferior ovaries that are sort of embedded in the pedicel below. So this is one way, you can recognize a female flower in the Cucurbitaceae. You will not see an ovary in a male flower. This does add an extra layer of protection for the really, really important ovary. That's the whole point. Ultimately, is what the ovary turns into, which is offspring through fruit and seeds. So by embedding itself beneath the other flower parts, it reduces the chance of injury by visiting pollinators. And then some plants have what's called a hypanthium, or a floral cup, and that's where the stamens, petals, and sepals are all fused into this cup at the base. So they're adnate with each other. And this is very common in the Rosaceae. Not all, but many of them have a floral cup. And they vary in their positioning. Sometimes they don't have to be superior ovary like this. They can be fused in a way that the cup is above the ovary or below the ovary or at the ovary. But more commonly, it's in this kind of conformation. And then there can be plenty of variation in the number of all these parts related to the original number of carpels that are fused together into single or multiple pistils. So you can have multiple ovary styles and stigmas to varying degree, like in the case of this magnolia flower there, and what's character and not uncommon with more primitive flowering plants like magnolia is that there can be a gradual transition between sepal-like structures, petal-like structures, stamen-like structures, and pistil-like structures. Um, that the numeracy of those parts is also sometimes a characteristic of these more primitive plants too. But this is an up-close image of the multiple ovaries of a magnolia flower, and ultimately those fuse together into one fruit-like structure that opens up, let's say, um, multiple of uh, capsules, and then the seeds have this extra fleshy layer around them called an aril, and that is ultimately what ends up being the dispersal mechanism. So a bird will come and to detach the fleshy seed, consume the fleshy part of the seed, and defecate the hard part of the seed. Then just shows some more variation that is a consequence of pistil being originally derived from multiple carpels. So in this Malpighiae here, here's what the flower looks like. If you look closely, this has one ovary, but three different styles and with three different stigmas. So that may suggest this was the evolutionary ancestrally might have been three separate pistils. Um, Similarly, in this hibiscus we keep mentioning, because it is in fact a beautiful plant, thank you. There are 5 different stigmas that are fused together into one style and one ovary, with 5 different that suggest derivation from originally 5 different pistils. So now one ovary has 5 different carpels. And similarly, this amaryllis has 3 lobe stigma. Lilies have the same thing, so that suggests this was once 3 separate pistils fused into now one pistil with 3 carpels. That's more evident when you slice open the ovary. So other ways to look at the ancestry of that may be evidence of fusion of separate carpels into one pistil, will be the placentation, or the pattern of the attachment of the ovules. And yes, sometimes this is an important thing to look at in identification. So try to take a picture of that on your app, right? uh, so ovules can be attached in different ways. We have different terms for that. They can be attached at the center around a piece of other tissue. They can be attached on the inner edge, multiple sides. They can be attached on one side or at the base or at the top, singly, etc. So don't worry about knowing this too much, but just understand that the arrangement of the ovules can sometimes be an important distinction. Uh, more more examples here for some terms, though. Here is the outer part of the ovary. And then, because this was derived from the fusion of separate ovaries and pistils, there's a wall called a septum that separates the different um, locules or sections of the ovary, and the ovules in this case are attached to this center column. So it has what is called axile placentation. And just to be clear, each one of these ovules can potentially become a seed, and each one of those would be fertilized by a separate pollen grain, and each of those pollen grains contains 2 different sperm. In the case of this poppy species here, there are no septa separating the different groups of ovules, but the fact that they are in groups suggests this might have ancestrally been 5 different pistils, or 5 different carpels. But the here again are each ovules, and each one of those has to be fertilized by a different pollen grain. Nectaries are those glands that produce nectars as a reward for pollinators. They can be in many different places, like in the case of this buckwheat. Here, there is the swollen yellow structures are what produce the nectar. In the case of and in the case of this columbine, you have this long spur, this expansion of the petals or corolla, and at the base there's a nectary. So that really encourages, say, hummingbirds to get their long beak down there to access it. And the process, they get dusted with the pollen from the stamens up here. But sometimes there are um, nectaries outside of the flower. And so this is meant to attract insects like ants to come to do something else for the plant. So in the case of this elderberry, the nectaries are on the stem. Ants love this, and so they will be on it frequently. And if anyone tries to anyone else tries to get to these nectaries, they will try to defend it. So that's a selective advantage for the elderberry. Another set of terms to know for identification is the names for the different kinds of groups of flowers. So a group of flowers is called an inflorescence. Rarely does a plant just have a single flower on it. It does happen, but it's not common. So these groups of flowers can be arranged in different ways. The each of these descriptors for inflorescences are themselves grouped as either indeterminate or determinate. And that is just indicating, do the flowers develop from the bottom up or kind of from the top down? And as we'll see in a minute, that the different inflorescence types are usually some derivation of a raceme or a cyme. So a raceme is the de facto indeterminate inflorescence, and a cyme is a de facto determinate inflorescence. In the case of raceme, you just have a simple stalk of flowers, and they develop from the bottom up. In the case of a determinate flower, you'll have a terminal flower, or inflorescence rather, like a cyme. You'll have a terminal flower that starts out first, and then it can branch into below that into flowers that didn't develop later. So looking at indeterminate inflorescences, starting with a raceme, a simple stalk of flowers. If you take that raceme and reduce the length of the pedicels so that the flowers look like they are directly attached to the peduncle, the stem structure here, it's called a spike. If you take a raceme and it starts to branch into multiple flowers, it's called a panicle. If you take a raceme and adjust the length of the pedicels so that all of the uh, flowers are occurring in roughly the same plane, it's called a corym. If you compress the distances between the flowers on the raceme to a single point, it's called an umbel. There's some examples. Here's the raceme of Baptisia. So here is the peduncle or the stalk, and then you can still clearly see a rather prominent pedicel about which each flower is attached. Contrast that to obedient plant here, which has a spike. You notice that the flower seems to be attacked um, directly to the flower stalk. And I'm having sudden doubts here. I think I mislabeled. So we're going to do a live fact check. I think I need to correct this slide because it is, I think I have the wrong family. Yeah, sorry. So write down now, obedient plant is not a legume. That should say the Lamiaceae. So it's in the mint family, not the bean family. Sorry about that. And then here's an example of a panicle of the great Satan, Chinese privet, that invasive species here. So this is a branching raceme. And when it's a branching raceme, it's called the panicle. Here's an example of an umbel. So that, remember, an umbel is where all of the flowers are attached to a single point. And here it's a compound umbel. So it's an umbel of umbels. But fundamentally, if you look at each flower, they're all concentrated in one point. And this is characteristic of the carrot family. This is golden Alexander. So carrots, parsley, cilantro, fennel, um, Queen Anne's lace, all of these have umbels as characteristic of the family. And here's an example of a corym. Remember, a corym has different length pedicels that ultimately grow to about the same plane. Cymes, don't worry about as much. They're kind of messy, but you have a terminal flower that um, develops first, and then then that pattern can repeat. And every time it repeats, you get a central flower developing first, and then side flowers developing after that. And then the variations here would be differential development, where one side of that branching pattern doesn't develop. So if it all develops, if it develops on opposite sides at each branching point. So here you have terminal flower branch on the right, terminal flower branch on the left, terminal flower branch on the right, on and on and on. It's called the scorpioid cyme. But if that deletion of the other branch of a compound cyme is always on the same side, it's called a helicoid cyme. So terminal flower branch on the right, terminal flower branch on the right, terminal flower branch on the right, etc. So these compound cymes are kind of characteristic of the borage family. Here's a scorpioid cyme, so you can see the terminals alternating, whereas in a helicoid cyme, they are always on the same side, so it kind of curves into this helix shape. And then there are also two other kinds of specialized inflorescences to be aware of. There are probably more, but the two important ones would be the capitulum or the head, which is characteristic of most of the Asteraceae, this huge family, the aster family, 25,000 plus species. So when you look at like this Heliopsis or you look at a sunflower, you're not looking at a single flower. This is an entire inflorescence or group of flowers that's been compressed into this single head. So the if you were to slice this in half, you have this mushing together of multiple receptacles, and then lots of tubular flowers inside the inflorescence. And many of them, like in this example, there are two kinds of flowers. On the outside are the ray flowers, and the inside are the disc flowers. In many cases, but not all, the ray flowers are sterile. They may not have ovaries and stamens, but they could. But what's happened is that part of the corolla tube has expanded into this long lobe, so that when they're all on the edge or the perimeter of the flower, they form what look like individual petals, but those are in fact individual flowers. And at the interior, the corolla tube is highly reduced and not nearly as showy, and you just get the good bits or the sexy bits. So you have the stigmas and styles and stamens of an inferior and on an inferior ovary. And because again, these were comprised of individual flowers developmentally, evolutionarily at some point, all the bracts got fused together, and each of those bracts are called filaries, and the collective term for all of the bracts is called an involucre on an Asteraceae. So these asters have, in other words, a really complex flower morphology with a lot of specialized terms, which can make identifying them a bit more challenging or keying them out a bit more challenging. And all the flower parts are quite small too, which makes it extra exciting. So why do they do this? What is the advantage here? Well, if you have lots of tiny flowers concentrated together, and each flower is still separate, each flower theoretically can be pollinated by different pollen grains, and that can happen with different pollinator visitors. So one pollinator, like a butterfly, could come visit, poke around with its proboscis looking for nectar. In the process, it gets lots of pollen on itself. It goes to another flower, also searches for nectar, and can get pollen from different flowers on different stigmas with one visit. So in just a few visits, the plant can get a huge amount of genetic diversity from one pollinator visit. So this is really advantageous potentially. Um, so this is part of the reason why there are now 25,000 species in this family. And then another kind of unusual inflorescence is the spathe and spadix structure of the Araceae, the arum family. So this whole business here is one inflorescence. So the spathe is this greatly expanded and colorful bract-like structure that subtends all the other flowers. That is what is showy. And then this inflorescence has both um, uh, male flowers at the tip and female flowers at the base. So the fruit end up developing at the base of this column structure called the spadix. Okay, finally, we'll end with fruit. We're almost done. Uh, Remember, after fruit set or after pollination and fertilization occur, the flower changes form. So the ovary swells to become the fruit, the ovule becomes the seed, and the egg cell fused with the sperm cell turns into the plant embryo, inside the seed, inside the fruit. But that can get messy with certain kinds of fruits, like I think we'll learn about this more in a minute, but in this example of a peach, the fruit wall has developed into three layers, the exocarp, mesocarp, and endocarp. And when you see a pit of a peach, that is actually still part of the fruit wall or ovarian tissue. And inside that pit is the actual seed. And in the case of peaches, it looks awfully like an almond seed because they are very closely related. And then, as I mentioned before, different fruits can be dispersed in different ways, and we describe those dispersal mechanisms as a chori. So the suffix chori indicates a dispersal mechanism. So a fruit that exhibits exozoochory means that it is dispersed by an animal externally. So it might have structures that allow it to stick to fur or feather or shoes or clothes. An endozoochorous fruit usually has a fleshy outside that's meant to be consumed by the animal, eaten by the animal, and where the flesh is digested and the seed is defecated. Hydrochory means dispersal by floating on water, like the case with coconuts. And anemochory means the fruits and or seeds are dispersed in the wind, like with dandelion, or in this case, milkweed. The fruit stays attached, but the seeds are the structures that have the parachute-like components that aid in wind dispersal. And there can, as I mentioned before, there can even be self-dispersal, autochory, like in the case of this jewelweed, where the fruit matures unevenly so that when it's disturbed, it has a spring-like action and flings the seeds away from the parent plant. There are many different terms to describe fruits too, and they are also important for identification. We classify fruits based on how many flowers or ovaries they're derived from. So if they come from one ovary from one flower, it's a simple fruit. If a fruit produces um, is derived from many ovaries on one flower, it's an aggregate fruit. And then if it's derived from many separate flowers that later fuse together into a single fruit unit, it's called a multiple fruit. Fruits can either be dry at maturity or fleshy and juicy at maturity. Some may open at maturity, so that's dehiscent, or some do not open at maturity and thus are indehiscent. And there can be other specialized features that distinguish the different fruit types. So some examples include a fruit called an achene. This is a simple, dry, and indehiscent fruit. So it's derived from one flower, one ovary. It does not open at maturity, and it is not fleshy at maturity. So a great example is the fruit of sunflower. It's technically an achene. So when you see the shell or sunflowers in the shell, that shell is the fruit, the ovary-derived tissue, and then the seed you eat inside is the actual seed tissue. So notice there is space between the seed and the outer layer of the fruit wall. Here's sunflower, another species of sunflower. And they have, in this case, specialized expansions of the fruit wall that are called the pappus that aid in wind dispersal. The grain or caryopsis is the fruit of grasses, and this is sort of like an achene, except that the fruit wall and seed are fused into one unit. So technically, these are the fruits of wheat and maize and rye, respectively. But all grasses have some sort of grain. Nuts, technically speaking, are kind of like achenes, but they have a very, very thick fruit wall. So acorns are types of nuts. This is American lotus, where the receptacle stays attached and swells and it releases a nut. But inside that thick nut, there is a seed. Samaras are a general term to refer to fruits with wings on them that are dry and indehiscent. Correctly, things like tulip poplar and ash have true samaras. Maples are often cited as a classic example of a samara, but because they're derived from two ovaries from the same flower that split at maturity, they're technically samaroid schizocarps, but more on that in a second. But you can think of them as the whirligiggy helicopter-like fruits are called samaras. Now, some plants have fruits that open at maturity, and if they open just along one suture, it's called a follicle. So here is a follicle um, of a milkweed, or in the case, same thing with columbine. They are technically follicles. They open up usually along one suture, and then the seeds can fall out or come out. In the case of milkweeds, through these parachute-like structures away from the parent plant. Legumes are the fruits of the legume family, the Fabaceae, and they are interesting because they open up on two lines of dehiscence, and on each side of the fruit, uh, rows of seeds are attached. So here's the legume of the black locust, a native tree. Legume is what we see on peas. So when we eat peas, we're eating immature fruit because if you leave them to maturity, they will harden up. But in some types of peas, we eat the immature seeds, and other types, like with snap peas or snow peas, we're eating the immature fruit itself with underdeveloped seeds inside. Silicles and siliques are the fruits uh, of the mustard family. They're called silicles. Sorry, they're called yeah, siliques if they're long and slender, and silicles if they're short and squat. They look sort of like legumes. They do open up on two sides, but instead of being attached to the outer fruit wall, there's another bit of tissue called a repulum that the seeds are attached to. Well, here's this each outer part, and here is the repulum with the seeds attached. Capsules are dry, dehiscent, simple fruits that open up along multiple sides or sutures. So here's the capsule of agave. Here's a capsule of hibiscus, the capsule of Dutchman's pipe. Um, and they can open up in different ways. So if they open up between the septal walls, it's said to be a locucidal capsule. If they open up along the septal walls, it's septicidal, for example. And they can open up in other weird ways too. So a circumscissile capsule, like in purslane here, opens up along a circular axis, which is pretty sweet. And then many poppies open up along the top edge, and the fruit remains attached to the plant. And when the plant moves in the wind, it shakes the seeds out like a pepper or the um, dispenser. There's a word for that, isn't there? Shaker. Um, anyway, that's the idea. Kind of cool. Schizocarbs are a specialized term for a simple dried hissing fruit where it's derived from a single flower, but one or more or two or more carpels actually split from the pistil in a kind of funny way. So geranium is technically a schizocarp, so this means split fruit. And this is on Carolina geranium, so that splits apart and they are flung away from the parent plant. Berries are the kind of de facto fleshy fruit. So if it's just a generic fleshy fruit, it's probably a berry of some sort. But a lot of what we call berries are not real berries. Um, the tomatoes are true berries. And so when you're having that BLT, you can say you're just biting into a big old swollen ovary. And the slimy, juicy stuff is technically called the placenta. So please think about that the next time you eat a tomato. Grapes are true berries. Greenbriers actually have true berries. And blueberries are technically true berries. But strawberries are not true berries. Blackberries are not true berries. Those are actually um, uh, aggregate fruits. So the fleshy part of a strawberry is a modified receptacle, and what we see as seeds are actually tiny achenes, and the seeds are inside those little tiny fruits. A specialized type of berry is called a drupe, and as we alluded to before, a drupe is when one of the layers of the fruit wall becomes hard and surrounds the seed. So the pit of a peach or a plum uh, is actually part of the fruit wall, and inside the pit is the actual seed. Pipos are the fleshy fruits of the cucurbit family, like cucumber, and it just means it's a berry with a really thick and leathery outer fruit wall layer. Pomes are types of accessory fruits. An accessory fruit is a fruit that is derived from not a non-ovarian tissue. So in the case of pomes like apples and pears, the receptacle swells and surrounds what would be the ovaries. The core of the apple is actually what's left of the true ovary or true fruit. And Hesperidia are the fruits of the citrus family, the Rutaceae, and they just have lots of juicy sacs inside, which make them delicious. And they also have a kind of leathery outer fruit layer too. Aggregate fruits are where fruits form from a single flower that have multiple ovaries. Classic example would be, um, oops, another mistake. I'm so sorry. I need to change this. This is a blackberry, not a magnolia, believe it or not. So pretend that says rubus something, rosaceae. This is a blackberry, everybody. So here's a blackberry flower. They have many pistils. The pistils fuse together into one unit. But that it's actually a drupe, believe it or not. So there's actually a pit inside each one of these little fleshy bits. And inside that pit, there is a tiny, tiny, tiny seed. So what gets stuck in your teeth are actually the endocarp of the fruit. And then multiple fruits are where you have separate flowers that fuse together into a single mass of fruit. So like in the classic example is pineapple is fused together into one big unit. Here are the individual flowers, and they fuse into one giant delicious fruit. But other more relatable examples might be in sweet gum. These are actually separate flowers fused together into a single um, fruit structure where the seeds are released. Same thing with sycamore here, many separate ovaries fused into one single fruit. And likewise with mulberry, many separate pistils fused into a single fleshy fruit that leaves as one unit. So that's the long and the short of it. And I'll do one more quick lecture on plant ID tools and resources.